In this video, we will be looking at the Treaty of Versailles, the peace settlement that set out the punishments for Germany after losing the First World War. So let's set the scene. World War I has just ended, and this was the most horrific war Europe had ever seen up to this point. Millions of young men had died, towns and cities in Europe had been destroyed, and billions of pounds were spent on the war. Germany had been defeated and was already facing political revolution and economic crisis at home, but things were about to get much, much worse. In 1919, politicians and diplomats from around the world gathered in Paris to decide the terms of peace. The location of the Paris Peace Conference was somewhere called the Palace of Versailles, which was sort of the French equivalent to Buckingham Palace. This was symbolically powerful because if you watch the video on Wilhelm's Germany, you may remember that Versailles was where the German Empire had been proclaimed in 1871, after Germany defeated the French. Now the roles were reversed. It was the defeated Germans who were about to get punished on French soil. There were 32 countries which sent representatives to Versailles, but there were three men who dominated the discussions. First up was the French Prime Minister, Georges Clemenceau, who came with a vengeance. Of the countries at Versailles, France had suffered the most from the war, losing 1.4 million people, and much of the fighting took place in northern France, destroying a large part of the country. He wanted harsh punishment, making sure that Germany must be weakened so badly that it could never threaten France again. Next up was the British Prime Minister, David Lloyd George. Again, he did want to punish Germany because nearly 1 million Brits died in World War I, and he agreed that Germany should pay for the damage it had caused and lose its military power, but he also needed Germany to recover economically so that it could trade with Britain and remain politically stable. Lastly, we have Woodrow Wilson, President of the United States of America. If you remember, the USA joined the war quite late in 1917, and in real terms suffered much less than the European powers, with just over 100,000 deaths. He opposed completely crushing Germany, fearing that if Germany was punished too harshly, it could result in Germans wanting revenge later on. And for the German delegation was nobody. Germany was not allowed to take part in negotiations, and they labelled the treaty as a diktat, meaning a dictated peace, as the terms were imposed on them, not agreed. If Germany did not sign, well, then there was always a prospect that the Allied powers could just invade Germany and make the situation even worse. Germany signed the Treaty of Versailles on the 28th of June 1919. The terms of peace were deeply unpopular, and there were 4 main clauses to learn, which will come up later on the course. Firstly, Article 231 was the War Guilt Clause, which stated that Germany was to take full blame and responsibility for starting the war. Germans saw this as the war guilt lie, as they knew that other countries all played their role in the run-up to the war. But as they say, history is written by the victors. Many believed that this was completely unfair and left a long-standing resentment against the foreign powers. Secondly, Germany's military would be cut. There would be a cap of 100,000 men in the army, and the navy would be severely limited to 6 battleships, and Germany was forbidden from having submarines, tanks, or an air force. This removed the ability for Germany to wage war again, but also to defend itself from its neighbours. The military was a source of great national pride and honour for Germany, and to see it cut was completely humiliating, as Germany had lost its status as a great power. Thirdly, territorial changes. Germany had 11 colonies around the world, and they were given to the Allied powers as they lost their empire. In addition, land in Europe was also lost to other nations, around 13% of the territory and around 10% of the population. These regions were also important because of the industry there, losing 50% of iron and 15% of coal reserves, reducing Germany's ability to recover after the war. Finally, you have reparations to compensate the Allied powers for the damages from the war. And at the time, the number wasn't finalised. But in 1921, the figure of £6.6 billion, 132 billion marks, was given and was a huge financial burden on the economy. This slowed down the recovery after the war and led to later crises such as hyperinflation. Believe it or not, Germany only finally finished paying off their World War I reparations in 2010. The treaty briefly united Germans from across the political spectrum, as pretty much everyone hated Versailles and condemned it. However, the government had been forced to accept the terms, reinforcing the stab in the back myth, the idea that Germany had been betrayed by its own politicians. Down the line, nationalist groups such as the Nazi Party would use the hated Treaty of Versailles as a powerful propaganda tool, promising to reject the terms, rebuild the army and empire, and lead Germany back to greatness. That's all for this video. In the next one, we will cover the challenges facing the early Weimar Republic with the Spartakists and the Kapp Putsch uprisings. See you then.